Okay, let's unpack this. We're all kind of navigating life, right? Making countless choices, interacting, forming opinions. But how often do we really stop and think about the forces, these sort of invisible forces shaping our actions, things we don't even realize are happening? Today, we're doing a deep dive into something fundamental, something maybe we don't examine enough. The huge difference between living in abundance and living, well, under the shadow of scarcity. And it's not just about influencing us, this dynamic, it reshapes who we are, what we do. It's pretty profound when you think about it. Now, when we say scarcity or abundance, yeah, your mind probably jumps straight to money, assets, the obvious stuff. And our source material definitely covers that as a big part of it, maybe the most visible part. But what's really fascinating, what makes this source material so insightful, is that it pushes way beyond just the financial side. It talks about a much broader definition, like the lack or plenty of affection, attention, time, opportunities, even just mental energy. So this deep dive, it's going to show that our state of being is about so much more than just your bank account. It's about these non-material things too, crucial things.
That's such a critical point the source makes, and what's really interesting is how interconnected it all is. The source makes this compelling case that a country's economic health, it isn't just some abstract number, it actually ripples, directly or indirectly, through every single person's life in that country. If the whole environment is struggling, well, we all feel those ripples somehow. Maybe it's fewer jobs or fewer opportunities, maybe even just less hope floating around. It really paints a picture where the big picture, the macro economy, shapes our individual behavior, our mental states in ways we just don't always connect. But they're definitely linked.
Exactly. That deep connection is what makes this so valuable, I think. So our mission today is, well, to get past the surface level. We want to distill the really surprising facts, the core ideas from this source. We want to help you get this knowledge quickly, thoroughly, maybe trigger some of those aha moments about behavior patterns you've seen, maybe in yourself, maybe in others, but couldn't quite put your finger on why. It's like getting a new lens, a new way to see why people do what they do. The fundamental divide, scarcity versus abundance. Okay, let's start by really contrasting these two states. The source lays it out almost like two different operating systems for humans, depending on the situation. So when people are genuinely in a state of abundance, and remember, not just money, but opportunity, security, emotional well-being too, what does the source say happens? How do they act differently? It says they tend to, open themselves up to the world. It's quite remarkable. It's not just about feeling comfortable financially. It's like being freed from that constant nagging feeling of need. So they look for new opportunities, they embrace things that might have seemed too risky before. And this abundant state, the source argues, it fosters real generosity. People want to share what they have, tangible or not. And maybe the most striking thing, it builds trust. Deeper trust in others, which allows for, bigger, more cooperative interactions. It's an outward-looking way of being, secure, full of possibility.
Right. And the psychology behind that, the source suggests, involves having less cognitive load. Your mind isn't constantly scrambling for survival, so you have bandwidth for creativity, for helping others, for seeing the bigger picture.
Makes sense.
But then, flip the coin, when we look at scarcity, the source shows the complete opposite happens. It's like a psychological pulling back. Instead of opening up, people tend to close themselves off. They become more protective, more defensive. The material really highlights how jealousy, that feeling of resentment towards others who have what you lack, becomes much more common. People guard the little bit they have fiercely like it's this priceless treasure, Their last defense against falling off the edge completely. It's a huge shift from being open and giving to being guarded and suspicious.
That psychological weight you mentioned, that tunnel vision, it makes sense. Immediate needs just take over everything, right? So long-term plans, generosity, even basic trust, they become luxuries you can't afford.
Exactly. It constricts everything. And it leads to behaviors that prioritize me first, right now, above all else, often at the expense of others or even your own future well-being.
And this is where the source gets into some really startling consequences.
Yeah.
It shows the extreme things people might do under scarcity. Things that, under normal circumstances, they'd find unthinkable, maybe even morally wrong. When that pressure of lacking resources or opportunities gets too intense, people can make choices they truly would never consider otherwise. Just to hang on. It really shows how powerful circumstance can be over character.
Precisely. And the source gives some, frankly, quite unsettling examples. It's not just theory. We're talking about things like someone informing on a coworker maybe even making something up or exaggerating a small mistake just to keep their own job when layoffs are happening. It's less about being malicious and more about pure, desperate self-preservation. Or, even worse, actively trying to get someone fired, maybe by undermining them or spreading rumors specifically to create an opening for a friend or relative. Yeah. And the source argues these aren't just isolated bad apples. They represent a kind of systemic breakdown of trust and solidarity, driven by that intense pressure of scarcity, whether it's economic or social. When your basic needs feel threatened, the lines blur, you know? What looks wrong from the outside can feel like the only option from the inside. And this erosion of ethics, it's not just person to person. The source points out that in the business world, too, when there's widespread scarcity, maybe lack of market share, falling profits, fierce competition, things like internal theft, fraud, tax evasion, even just aggressive avoidance, they become disturbingly common. It's not always just a few bad actors. It can become a kind of widespread coping mechanism, a perceived necessity to survive or just stay competitive. Companies feel the squeeze and might cut corners they wouldn't otherwise.
So the underlying principle here is pretty sobering then.
It is. The source really drives this home. When what we need is scarce, whether it's income, stability, opportunity, even fairness, disloyalty becomes frequent. Disloyalty to rules, to ethics, to the community, it becomes almost normalized for many people. It's a stark reminder of how much our external situation can compromise our internal compass, how desperation can really override decency.
And what's really striking, maybe even disturbing, is how universal the source says this is. It's not just one group or one class behaving this way. No, the source is explicit. These attitudes, these behaviors, the disloyalty, the self-preservation, at all costs, they happen in all sectors of society that are feeling that pinch of scarcity. So you see it in the high-stakes corporate world, the upper echelons, where the fight for power and money is intense. And you see it right down at street level, with people just struggling to get by day to day.
Absolutely. Whether you're a CEO worried about market share or an hourly worker trying not to get laid off, the pressure of scarcity can trigger similar, often desperate responses. It really highlights that it's less about people being inherently good or bad, and more about the incredible corrosive pressure of dire circumstances. That pressure can bend anyone's moral compass right across the social spectrum.
To really hammer this point home and show how deep this response goes, the source uses this great analogy from the animal kingdom. It really shows this isn't just a human thing or a product of our complex societies. It's almost like, well, a biological blueprint for survival. Wired into us.
Exactly. If you just watch wild animals fighting over territory or even your pets squabbling over a foodable, you see the same dynamics. When food is scarce, like a single carcass, they'll fight viciously over every scrap. Instinct takes over. Extreme competition, aggression, zero regard for others, survival first. Biology demands it. But the source notes, when there's abundance, plenty of food, easy access, everything changes. Tempers calm right down, aggression drops, conflict reduces. Animals might share, coexist peacefully, even cooperate sometimes. It powerfully reinforces this idea of an innate response to resources. It shows our human reactions to scarcity aren't unique. They tap into something deeper, more primal, that governs life itself. It just underscores how profoundly the presence or absence of resources shapes behavior, from tiny creatures to us.
That's a really powerful connection. And the source doesn't stop at physical stuff, does it? It says these same scarcity dynamics play out just as strongly, maybe even more so, in our emotional lives and our relationships. So what happens when something like affection or love becomes scarce in someone's life, or maybe across a whole society?
That's a critical insight, and one we often overlook. The source specifically points out that certain behaviors, like prostitution or infidelity, they tend to skyrocket when there's a widespread lack of affection, intimacy, or love. Now, this isn't presented as a moral judgment, but as an observation about the motivation. When that fundamental human need for connection, for validation, for emotional security is really scarce, people get desperate. They look to fill that void however they can. They might resort to things they wouldn't normally consider, things that might even be compromising or costly, just to get a bit of that emotional sustenance. That emotional hunger, just like physical hunger, can drive people to extremes. And the source notes how this desperate search often makes people behave in really intense, sometimes volatile ways during scarcity, whether it's material or emotional scarcity. It talks about people becoming extreme in their actions because of the deficit they feel. For example, in a relationship lacking emotional connection, one partner might become super demanding or possessive, constantly needing reassurance to fill that void. Conversely, when there's emotional abundance, there's more security, more generosity, more freedom in the relationship.
So the advice is to try and stay balanced.
Ideally, yes. The The source suggests cultivating internal balance is key in both situations. But the tough reality it highlights is that the sheer pressure of scarcity, whatever its form, tends to shatter that balance. It pushes people to extremes because they're just trying to cope, trying to survive, trying to fill a deep and often painful need. It distorts their usual behavior.
Okay, let's drill down into some more everyday examples. Those social interactions the source describes. Think about basic social stuff, how it changes. When there's abundance money or just that general feeling of security, things are so different. The source paints these vivid pictures, like someone spontaneously buying a round for the whole bar. Not because they have to, but out of pure generosity, sharing the good fortune. People invite you into their homes more readily, homes that are often tidy, welcoming, reflecting pride and less stress. There's this genuine desire to share, to show what they have, to be open. It creates a really communal, inviting vibe. It's expansive.
Right, and here's where that shift becomes so incredibly clear. Because then, when that breeze of scarcity, as the source calls it, blows through maybe an economic downturn or just a personal feeling of lack, the opposite happens, almost automatically. Suddenly, it's not communal anymore, it's individual. Everyone pays for their own drink, meticulously splitting the bill, accounting for every cent. Those spontaneous invites, they dry up. People don't just become less generous, they often pull back, physically and emotionally.
They get more reserved, they stay home more, maybe out of embarrassment or just not wanting to show what they lack. Fearing judgment, maybe?
And it's not just about money, right? It's a deeper shift in how we engage socially, a reluctance to connect openly, to be vulnerable. It really shows how these two states, scarcity and abundance, dictate our most basic social habits and our willingness to even engage with the world. 2, Western society's modern scarcity. Causes and consequences. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Because the source makes a really critical, maybe even controversial claim here. It doesn't just talk about scarcity in theory. It asserts that Western society right now is going through a long period of scarcity. This isn't just a blip like a normal economic cycle. It's presented as a specific diagnosis of our current times, suggesting that a lot of the tension we see today, social, economic, is a direct result of this underlying condition. It challenges us to see this not as temporary, but as a prolonged state shaping our lives.
And this is exactly where we need to be careful, as impartial presenters of this material, to show the different viewpoints the source highlights, because it actually offers two quite distinct perspectives on why this modern Western scarcity is happening. The first view attributes it to, well, a massive shift in global economic power, specifically the undeniable rise of instant economies. This perspective suggests that as Eastern nations built up manufacturing, tech, and consumer markets, wealth and industry naturally redistributed globally. And that, in turn, led to a relative scarcity of the old kind of economic opportunities and dominance for the West. Industries moved, competition changed everything. It's an argument rooted in global market forces.
Okay, that's one perspective. What's the other one?
Well, the source also explores another possibility, one that's definitely more provocative, maybe more politically charged. It suggests this scarcity might be something deliberately engineered, or at least skillfully exploited, by certain power elites. The idea presented is that these elites might be using or creating scarcity conditions strategically, aiming to gain more political control over parts of the world, consolidating power while everyone else is distracted by the crisis. It hints at a more top-down manipulation.
Right, so two very different potential causes.
Exactly, and it's vital we stress this. Regardless of which cause you might find more plausible, or even if you doubt both, the source is adamant that the symptoms of this scarcity are real, they're undeniable, and they're affecting all of us right now. Our job here is just to report what the source says, not to pick a side, but to help you understand the different ways this is being interpreted.
Understood. And one of the most visible symptoms, one that's really growing and deeply felt, which the source points to, is this increasing rejection of immigration in the West. The source draws a really stark historical comparison that's quite revealing. Back in times of perceived abundance, economies booming, plenty of jobs, a sense of expansion, immigrants were generally welcomed, right? They were often seen as essential, a necessary workforce, filling gaps, boosting the economy, bringing new energy. It was seen as a win-win.
But that changes dramatically under scarcity.
Completely. The source details how certain groups in society, usually those feeling the economic pinch the hardest, insecure jobs, stagnant wages, strained services, they start pointing the finger directly at immigrants, blaming them for the country's problems. The narrative shifts from they contribute to they drain resources or they take our jobs. Immigrants become scapegoats for complex, systemic issues. The source argues this is a classic, potent outcome of a scarcity mindset hitting broad social and political attitudes. It fuels division, xenophobia,
And the source goes deeper into the consequences of this scarcity-driven division, this sectarianism. It issues a pretty stark warning about what it calls the internal problem. The argument is that when scarcity makes people intensely tribal, intensely us versus them, even if they somehow manage to get rid of the perceived outsiders like immigrants, that divisive energy wouldn't just disappear. It would inevitably turn inwards. Internal problems would just flare up next.
It's like the need to blame finds a new target.
Precisely. The source observes that every country has its own internal fault lines, regional differences, historical grievances, class tensions, cultural divides, things that might lie dormant during good times. It gives examples like stereotypes within a country. Oh, people from the South are like this, or people from the North owe us that. These aren't just harmless jokes. They become weapons when scarcity takes hold. The energy previously aimed at immigrants gets redirected inwards, fracturing society even further. It becomes a dangerous cycle where blame needs a constant outlet.
That's a bleak picture.
It is. And here's the really chilling personal warning from the source. It cautions that eventually the person who gets singled out, pointed at, blamed, marginalized, could be you or someone you know. You too will eventually feel that breeze of scarcity, as the source puts it. It's a stark reminder that these divisive forces, once normalized, rarely stop at one target. They spread, consuming group after group, until society itself starts to unravel. Nobody is truly safe from the fallout.
And this fracturing links directly to the rise of classism, which the source sees as a closely related problem, also fueled by scarcity. It paints this picture of a chain reaction of marginalization, almost like society eating itself from the inside out when resources feel tight. Think about the scenario it describes. That same worker, maybe feeling insecure, who was pushing against immigrants thinking they were the problem, suddenly finds themselves being looked down upon, marginalized, maybe even blamed by higher social classes in their own town.
So the U.S. versus them just keeps shifting.
Exactly. Scarcity doesn't just create conflict with outsiders, it creates these internal hierarchical splits. The pressure to protect what you have or gain an edge in what feels like a zero-sum game leads to finding new ways to divide people, new groups to push down. The very people who felt part of the in-group against one perceived threat suddenly become the out-group for someone else further up the ladder. It highlights just how insidious and self-destructive scarcity's impact can be. It's a vicious cycle that just burns through social trust.
And then the source delivers this fundamental economic reality check. A dose of hard truth that it claims many people in the West just aren't seeing, maybe because it's uncomfortable. It directly challenges that idea that just removing immigrants or closing borders would magically fix deep economic problems or bring back some golden age of abundance.
What's the reality check specifically?
The source states bluntly that Western countries are carrying such massive national debts built up over decades through complex global finance, spending, you name it, that even if every single immigrant they might want to leave did leave, it wouldn't even come close to creating the abundance people imagine. The scale of the economic challenge, according to the source, is just vastly bigger than the impact of immigration. The problems are systemic, structural, tied to global shifts, deindustrialization, massive debt. They're way more entrenched than just issues of labor supply or social costs. It's a powerful counter-narrative, insisting the underlying financial reality is far more complex and needs far deeper solutions.
Okay, so connecting that to the bigger picture, the source uses the U.S. as a specific example, right?
Yes. It details how the United States, with its current economic setup, just isn't positioned to make products domestically at prices that can compete globally. And this isn't something a quick fix can solve. The source argues that unless the U.S. fundamentally changes its whole productivity model, not just making more stuff, but rethinking innovation, labor cost, technology integration, maybe even bringing key industries back, but in a totally new way, those core issues preventing competitiveness will just persist. It requires a deep transformation, not just tinkering.
And there's a cultural element mentioned too. Yes, and this is quite a pointed observation. The source notes that the U.S. currently doesn't have the culture of the Eastern people or their ways of doing things. It suggests a deep difference in approach, maybe work ethic, societal structure, collective priorities that makes competing on certain terms very hard. Now, the source isn't saying one culture is better, it's making an analytical point. Regaining that competitive edge to ease internal scarcity would need not just policy changes, but maybe a fundamental shift in mindset and how society operates. It paints a really complex picture of the underlying economic challenges fueling the social tensions. The path back to abundance looks far from simple. 3, navigating the future, a call for human virtues. So boiling it all down, the main reflection the source wants to leave us with is this. We have to be aware that we are living right now in significant times of scarcity. It's not hypothetical, it's our reality shaping everything. And the source, again, doesn't shy away from its perspective that the scarcity in the West is possibly provoked or taken advantage of by sectors of power to dominate the West. Understanding that viewpoint is key to grasping their interpretation of things, suggesting deliberate manipulation, not just natural change. It frames their call to action.
Right, provides their context for the why.
Exactly. And beyond the cause, the source stresses another reality. We're already in a post-globalization world. There's no going back. Economies, cultures, information, it's all interconnected now. That's permanent. So what this means, the source argues, is we absolutely must find a new way for that abundance we once felt in the West, that post-war era feeling to return. The old models, the old contracts, they just don't work anymore in this new global landscape. We need fundamental change, not just tweaks, to thrive again.
Which brings us to the huge question, how? How do we navigate this challenging period of scarcity? And the source's answer is, maybe surprisingly, human. It emphasizes surviving, even flourishing, by cultivating and holding on to basic human virtues. It's not about complicated economics or politics first. It's a call to personal character, collective morality. It suggests our inner strength, our ethics, our shared values. That's our best compass right now.
What specific virtues does it highlight?
They're simple, but incredibly tough, especially under pressure. First, be strong enough not to betray others, no matter how bad things get or how tempting it is to look out only for yourself. That's about deep personal integrity, sticking to ethics even when it costs you. Second, don't be disloyal so you don't have to beg forgiveness later. This isn't just about avoiding guilt, it's about preserving relationships, maintaining trust, holding on to the social fabric that scarcity rips apart so easily. Resisting that urge to be ruthless and competitive, choosing moral strength instead.
That's a high bar when things feel desperate.
It is. And beyond just individual acts, the source urges a big perspective shift. We need to start looking at the world differently, specifically from the viewpoint of the common good. Moving beyond just what's best for me to what's best for us. Recognizing our fates are linked, that my well-being depends on the community's well-being. That takes empathy, foresight, prioritizing the collective. And overriding all of that, the non-negotiable principle, defend human rights above all else. That's the bedrock for any hope of a just future, especially when things are tough.
And the source ends with a final, quite powerful warning, circling back to that animal analogy, right? To really drive home the danger of not adapting our behavior.
Yeah, it's pretty chilling.
The warning is essentially this. If we stay stuck in that scarcity mindset, if our behavior gets locked into constant competition and distrust, then when abundance does eventually return, and the source implies it will, through innovation or shifts or whatever, we might be tragically stuck. We might find ourselves still fighting each other, tearing things down, totally blind to the fact that conditions have actually changed. It could be too late to shift gears, too late to relearn cooperation if we've become too conditioned by scarcity thinking. It really questions our ability to adapt, to see beyond the immediate struggle.
Like those animals.
Exactly like those animals conditioned by long scarcity. Even when food suddenly becomes plentiful, their ingrained fear, their competitive instinct, their tunnel vision, they only see the little bit right in front of them. So they kill each other over that small bit, completely missing the bigger bounty all around them. They can't see the forest for the trees. And that analogy really highlights the risk for us, that scarcity thinking could persist even when things get better, leading us to act irrationally, self-destructively, preventing us from actually thriving in renewed abundance. It's a call for self-awareness, for foresight, for intentionally building a mindset that can handle today and be ready for tomorrow. Outro.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? This deep dive, I hope, has shown how the presence or the crushing absence of abundance, financial, emotional opportunity, it doesn't just shape our personal choices. It genuinely shapes the very fabric of our society. Our relationships, global dynamics, community structures, it really pulls back the curtain on these powerful, often unseen forces, hopefully giving you a clearer way to understand the world.
Exactly. And understanding these dynamics, seeing what might be driving certain trends or behaviors, it allows us to be more aware. And maybe with that awareness, we can be more resilient, more thoughtful, more intentional in how we respond, both to lack and to opportunity. It's about moving from just reacting instinctively to, well, acting with purpose, maybe fostering more foresight, more focus on collective well-being.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought, something provocative, building on that call for human virtues from the source. In a world where perceived scarcity can so easily drive us apart, breed disloyalty, make us turn inward, What specific actions, maybe even small ones, of generosity, of genuine openness, of commitment to the common good can you take today, starting now? What does it mean for you personally to consciously push back against that breeze of scarcity, to act from a place of abundance even if the world outside feels lacking? How can you start, in your own way, to cultivate the conditions for a different kind of future, one built on shared purpose and resilience, regardless of the bigger picture?
It's a powerful question to reflect on.
It is. We really encourage you to think about these insights, maybe look for these patterns in your own life, in the world around you, now that you have this new lens from our deep dive today.